We are an organization based out of Omaha that serves a 10-state region, primarily in the low-income housing tax credit or income-restricted rental housing investment using federal programs, and there are a lot of other state and other programs that go into the kind of projects that we do. In the last 3 years, as Midwest Housing Development Fund, we're a community development financial institution, we branched out into looking at workforce housing needs, primarily in Nebraska and in our rural areas with some help from philanthropy that also wanted to see some solutions in this area. So we take the knowledge that we have in the development business and the relationships that we have there and try to see what we can do to help communities to work on workforce housing. It helps our business too. Our projects do better in communities that are strong and thriving and have a variety of housing options in the community, and our investments are meeting a lot of needs. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've been hearing more and more consternation from communities that are saying the only new construction I've seen in my community is an income-restricted project with low-income housing tax credits. And that's certainly not what we want to see in our communities. We want to see those projects, but we want to see housing at all levels being continued to develop and rehabbed in those communities. So I'm going to talk about some things that are going on nationally and we're seeing in our region as well around us when it comes to workforce housing. And I kind of categorize workforce housing as not income restricted, but often cost restricted housing. So it's not the upper income. We want to hit a certain price point for the people that we're housing in the communities, but not limit our developers and our property owners and our sellers and our communities in general as to who they can sell and rent to. We want to have our doors open to whoever's moving in and whoever needs to move around as well, because we need to have those options inside the community for the people that are there now. So you've heard much probably the last couple of years about what's often referred to as the missing middle, which is that home buyer purchase point where people are either they're first-time home buyers, they're moderate income, they're not buying $500,000 houses. In cities across the nation, and our rural communities have been seeing it probably even longer, are missing that level of housing and price point that's good quality housing that's meeting the needs in the market. And the reason we're seeing some of that is because of our builder shortage. If I'm a builder and I can either build a $500,000 house or a $150,000 house, even if I can figure out how to make that work from a financial standpoint, I'm probably going to build the higher end house. So those renters that are choosing to rent, why? Are they looking for mobility? Are they concerned that they may or may not want to stay in the community? That's a great opportunity for communities because once you get them there, they're more likely to stay. So you really need a shorter term rental options, and then you hopefully are helping them to move on to ownership at some point. Is it a cost issue? Sometimes that's just education. Often we'll find in rental units, it does not cost more to own than it does to rent. It depends on what you're owning and depends on what you're renting. If you take into account utility costs and all the other things that come with it, and that your rents are likely to be increased over time, whereas your mortgage payment is not by much, that's something to consider in just on education side. Another component they're looking at when we're looking at bringing people to the community is transportation. Are people driving until they qualify for the housing? Are they commuting long distances because they can't live close to their work, so they have to get somewhere else to be able to qualify? Or in some cases, are they driving so that they can live in the community that they want to live in because it has a different community feel, culture, opportunities, school system, whatever it is? And the National Association of Realtors is seeing this number go up, up, and up. And driving costs matter to 76% of home buyers. So we have a really great story to sell in Nebraska as far as commuting distances and commuting times. If we can really get our arms around what the story is and being able to have those opportunities in the community. Another thing to consider is that most renters, by vast majority compared to home buyers, are single income households, and home buyers by vast majority are double income households. So when you're looking at who you are bringing into the community, into your workforce, if you're trying to bring in single income earners because they are new to the workforce, they just got out of their training or out of college, they're not in a double income household yet, there's a pretty good chance that they're a renter to start out with, but they may become a home buyer. There's a trend going on more and more that those folks will buy a house and rent out a room, so they'll become a double income household. But these are the things that we have to understand about who we're bringing into the community. We also, there's a lot more conversation going on about land use. There's always been conversation about land use, but some of that is coming back up again as it comes to workforce housing. What are we doing with zoning and codes? Do we have maximum density requirements that are causing our costs to go up or making it difficult to build the housing that we need, and lot size requirements? We have communities that have very well-meaning and well-intended low density, large lot size requirements for their community that makes it difficult to build some of the housing now that community wants to have. Maybe there's townhomes that they want to have available, or they want some of this sort of missing middle housing that's hard to do from a development and financial standpoint where you already have some thin margins on development when you have these additional requirements. In addition, due to the natural disasters that occurred lately, where it's coming to the forefront again, that because some of the housing's located in more flood-prone areas, when you go in to rebuild or to recover from that, it actually is easier for me as a developer, if I'm a developer, to go in and build again on that flood-prone area than it is to go out into some of the other areas that have not yet maybe been zoned appropriately for residential because they weren't used for that before. So we need to be thinking a lot about our zoning, codes, density requirements, all of those things. And there's no one answer for all communities. It's just something that's got to be in front of the conversation. Lenders and our bankers, you and our communities, as Mark mentioned, are important leaders, have always been important leaders in housing and need to continue to be as we talk about workforce housing. And it's a question that's out there. A lot of folks that are in the development business are talking about new and interesting financing mechanisms to get housing built. And we need to hear from all of you as to what's going to work and what's not when it comes to even just traditional bank financing. There's a lot of talk about community land trusts, where the land is owned by one nonprofit land trust, and then what's built on it is owned by that property owner, and so the land trust will ensure that the property stays affordable or at a certain rent or a certain quality, whatever it is that land trust is trying to protect at the time. It has worked in many communities, but what do the lenders think about that? Are you going to be able to finance a project? And if you did, what kind of model does that need to look like? There's shared equity and co-ops, and how do those need to be put together? We've talked about tiny homes and innovative construction materials and those kind of things. How does that help you when you're looking at somebody purchasing or even financing a rental property that's along those lines, if it's difficult to find comparables, if it's hard to see what the market's going to do in that? We have issues with like upper story downtown rehabs because it's hard to appraise the building during the construction period, and to be able to do that. So what can we do to put models together so we're able to finance it? Coming up more recently is PACE financing, which is around energy efficiency, which is going to have a lien on the property that's going to essentially be in first position. Are lenders going to be comfortable providing financing on those kind of projects? We need that feedback as an industry, and we need you to be thinking about it locally in a community and to speak up if something's not quite structured that down the road we're going to have difficulty making it work. But also beyond that, as community leaders, you know intuitively what people are likely to be able to afford in your community. Where your wages are at, where your cost of living is kind of at. You know what people are buying when it comes to purchasing homes. And you often know owners who want to sell, say, rental properties that may be rental properties and those kind of things. Do you know what people want on the other side? Be asking those questions. And what about the people that don't live there yet? So if it's the employees of a business that's trying to attract new people in, who are you not getting and how can they attract them there? You often know more about lots that might be available, buildings, and potential builders on the business side, because builders, we need them to come to the table. And a lot of times, if they're new in the industry, they have shortages in working capital to be able to build enough units at once, and they have some risk that they need some help managing as well. So those kind of things we ask from the housing industry on the developer side, and those of us that are in the non-traditional financing, like my organization, also want to hear from who locally is working at the bank, what they're really seeing in the community. Because you just have access and you know both from data and intuitively things about your community that we just don't know and don't have access to. And we appreciate that input. I finally wanted to go over some examples of some workforce housing sort of incentives. And the workforce housing incentive is really more about getting someone to build and develop or to make available that supply of housing. It's not so much for what we call the beneficiary or the household, because we hope that they have the wages and the resources to be able to pay for it if that supply is available to them. And those programs are more traditional in the affordable housing arena that help the beneficiary. So Iowa does have a workforce housing tax credit. We've talked about it with MBA before. If the developer works on dilapidated abandoned property, they get some refund of sales and service or use taxes, and they do get a refundable tax credit if they do those developments. The jury's still kind of out on the success of that program. We do know that there's a high demand for it. There are a lot of applications. They have a wait list. They've forward allocated up a couple of years into that program, but to actually see the developments occurring and making sure that it's bringing the housing that they want to see in the community. Kansas has a couple of programs. They call one moderate income housing, which is very similar to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is some of what Cheryl will talk about in Nebraska. It's just a little bit broader because it's not about affordable housing or income restrictions. It's more about being able to develop that housing that's just that next level up from the income restricted housing. And they also have something called rural housing improvement districts, which MBA has also discussed, which is essentially TIF financing, but it's not for blighted areas. It's instead for areas that need rural workforce housing development. But it's a very similar model. And they've seen a lot of success with that program and interest in using the sort of TIF model in order to get some workforce housing built. There are more and more what they're calling investment impact pools of funding happening across the nation. This is where philanthropy, banks, others will come in. And what does investment impact mean? It means you're meeting a need, but you're also getting some financial return on it. So it's financing pools that are coming in to help with the acquisition and help finance the development of housing in areas where it's difficult to use traditional financing in order to get some of that pre-development or beginning parts of development housing started, and also for developers and builders that are essentially new businesses or are getting their business going. And then continues to be more and more conversation about how to do mixed income, mixed use tools, which is essentially using those affordable housing development programs and coupling them with workforce housing programs and trying to get housing that is meeting needs across the board, those that are meeting those income restrictions, and then also other units and projects, whether it's single family homes for sale or for rent. And that's not really a new trend, it's a continuing trend, but there's more and more conversation about it. And we know that communities and individuals thrive and do better as much as you can have diversity, mixed income kinds of developments occurring in the community. Finally, I just wanted to say that the Blueprint Nebraska Housing Industry Council identified several pieces, as Mark was talking about. MBA's task force was absolutely part of starting that conversation. And there's a lot we're trying to sort out about in many areas, but community housing intelligence is how it's being referred to. But that need to be able to address in a community, if you have the shared agenda and you have competent leadership, you still need to be able to have access to the tools and the information, and we have some education to do. That we don't want that to be the barrier, that there's something out there for the community and the leaders and the developers and the builders to do. They just don't know which way to turn and where to start with it. So I'm excited to see where some of that work will take us, so that we can work with those communities to help get them get to some production, because ultimately we want production of more housing. Thank you.